Thank you, though.
let's keep rolling here. So, this is a story that it didn't get the coverage that it should have, and it was this op-ed piece that was in the Washington Post. Now, I clipped this out of Newsweek here. They're covering it, and Matt's got great expertise in this area. 3 retired U.S. Army generals have warned of insurrection or possibly even civil war if the results of the 2024 presidential election, 2 years away, folks, a little more than 2, are not accepted by sections of the military. Retired Major Generals Paul D. Eaton and Antonio Tagaba, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that right, joined retired Brigadier General Stephen Anderson, urging today's leaders to act to prevent such scenes, calling on today's leaders to war game an attempted coup. Now, this op-ed in the Washington Post that I mentioned, the former military leaders said they were increasingly concerned about the potential for lethal chaos inside our military, which would put all Americans at severe risk in the aftermath of the election. So, Matt, I look at that, and there's a couple of other pieces of that we'll get back to. And right off the top, I'm a cynic when it comes to anything generals are telling us, because, my God, copacetically up one side and down the other, they've been wrong about everything since I was a little bitty baby. But I kind of, my perspective on things changed a little after January 6th, and I saw those people crawling through the windows of the U.S. Capitol. I did not think that would happen. I got to tell you, I mean, and I'm still stunned by that. So what do you make of what these generals are saying?
I would be the same as you, George, and in terms of my cynicism or doubt towards the generals. And we're in good company. Eisenhower said the same. JFK said the same, right? I mean, you can't trust these guys. I actually do know Paul Eaton, one of the 3 generals, and Paul is a very sober, honest person. I'm the same as you. A year ago, I would have said, I think that's overblown. I think that's just hysteria about the elections and emotions and everything. And then we saw what happened January 6th. And the other thing too, though, as I go back and I anyone I meet from the Balkans, from the former Yugoslavia, Iraqis, I knew, Afghans who were old enough to know Afghanistan before the wars beginning in the late 70s, but mostly people from the Balkans, and then Iraqis that I know, they will say over and over again, we never thought it could happen. We never thought something like that would happen. We never thought that a civil war like that, where we were terrified of our neighbors, could happen here. I mean, I think that's there's that's a phrase, right? It couldn't happen here.
Yeah.
And so I think there is that concern, that is a very valid concern. I think within some of these, within some military units, you can have, look, it's a bubble. It's very easy to have information that goes one way, and that's self-reinforcing, an echo chamber. And we've talked about this before. I mean, this is one of the reasons why, there's a disparity between the number of active duty suicides and then veteran suicides, because when you leave the military, take the uniform off, you are no longer in that bubble. And so all sorts of things can come in, right? And you have to, things in your head you have to deal with when you're in that bubble. You're kind of protected from that. I think the same can work in the sense of, you may have certain units that have a certain viewpoint that gets reinforced because they are in a bubble together. So I think you could have something like this. You could have units that decide that they are not going to follow orders, or and the thing about it is, again, you go back to what happened in the former Yugoslavia, you go back what happened in Iraq, things fall apart quick. It's a cycle. It's a downward spin of a cycle. It's a cycle that just happens so fast that things just continue to break down and accelerate upon each other, where the fear that is put in place causes people to act, which causes people to act further. And so I think this idea that we could have something happen here that spins out of control very quickly, based upon misinformation, based upon fear, based upon perceived hatred. That if we don't act, these other people are going to do this, right? If we don't move to secure the state capitol, then these people, these other people, whoever the other are, right, whoever they are. But you hear, if you listen to the right-wing newscasts or Tucker Carlson or whatever, they use they a lot. They are going to do this, right? If we don't secure the state house, then they are going to Antifa, or whoever they want to describe it as, right, are going to. So it's very, I think that we are in a position that historically you look back at other nations and they say, well, we didn't think it could happen here. And it certainly did. And that was a real danger.
The guy that's on my show that talks about that a lot, Stephen W. Schmidt, Dr. Politics. I mean, why not here? I mean, he says we're being very naive if we think that something like that couldn't happen here. Let me ask you this based on your experience now, because there's one side that would say, those people were always in the military. I mean, there may be a few more of them now, but they've always been there. Just from when you were in uniform, as an example, was this fringe element, were they apparent? Did you notice it when you were in, or is this a manifestation of Trump and something that's gotten much, much worse since you were in uniform?
I mean, you always had your guys that were going to be more political. You're always going to have your guys. I remember there's this one guy who was always reading like Ann Coulter books, right? Or books, Rush Limbaugh books or something like that, but it's pretty harmless in that sense, so you always had that. But I never saw the things that these generals are talking about, the things that people are warning about. And I have to remember, people, I've been out since 2007 was the last time I wore a uniform. So it's been a bit, and social media is different now. I mean, there's a lot that has changed. So I do think that it is different, that there are attitudes and feelings that are easier to coalesce into some type of organization and movement within the ranks that wasn't there before. I mean, certainly you had it. I mean, there was always within. You had in the 90s there were busts of they were busting white supremacists, and these militia groups were sending young men into the army to try and learn skills. They busted some of that. I mean, that's kind of some of the stuff that comes out of the whole Oklahoma City, right, with Tim McVeigh, and there's kind of that. But what we're talking about now, where it's connected to a larger political movement, where there actually is the potential for those types of groups to be channeled and utilized for mass political purposes, to actually seize political objectives and goals, I don't think we've ever seen before, not in my lifetime, and I mean, I know American history fairly well, and if anyone can correct me on this, please do, but I don't think there's ever been something like this. I mean, Civil War in the big exact section, right? But like, where you've had this threat that, look, we have people in uniform who may have political opinions that may crystallize and become actual actions that they move on. So I think, we're in a pretty unique place, I think, historically.
What about the recruiting? And again, this segues very nicely from this NDAA that was just approved. They got all this money, man. They need people. They got plans. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going to happen, and they're having to reach down and get people, I think, that maybe they wouldn't have before. And are they vetting these people, or are they reaching out and getting people that are getting into the military because they want to take matters into their own hands, perhaps?
They say they're vetting them. And, the military has dropped down to the lowest recruiting standard, something they said they would never do again. They did. And they say that they're not issuing waivers, and that everyone is vetted, and that if someone does receive a waiver, it's gone to the highest levels. And I just don't believe that. I mean, and again, go back to, we mentioned briefly about suicides, that I think that's one of the reasons why you've seen this growth in active duty suicide, is because you're bringing in more people who have pre-existing mental health issues that are exasperated by their time in the military. But certainly the recruiting, look, they're having troubles recruiting. I know last year, the only reason why the Army made its mission for recruiting in terms of numbers it needed was because of the pandemic. And not just in the sense that less soldiers got out of the Army because they didn't want to get out of the Army during the middle of the pandemic. People weren't hiring, I mean, all kinds of different reasons. They didn't want to have health insurance, things like that. So there is a real issue with who they're bringing in. And there is also, too, you have to look at these groups that we're talking about, these right-wing militant groups. They like the military. They cherish the military. They think that they associate themselves with the military. So it's part of them, as part of their being or ethos to be in the military. So it's not even as if they are sitting around strategically saying, look, we need to get people into the military. Their people are already, the types of people who will be joining these militias are already joining the military because you have that connection. You have that connection between these right-wing militant groups and the military. I mean, you just do. I mean, like, this is what they like. They're nativists, they're nationalists, they're jingoists, and so they see the military as the highest form of service to the country. They see the military as not just a necessity, but as a virtue. So this is why, I think you're seeing, and then, and the reality is, yeah, with the January 6th riot, you had a high degree of military involved. I mean, it was disproportionate.
Right.
So there is this fear is justified.
Well, let's take a look at here. I want to bring up just spin through these clips here out of this. Now, this is Newsweek's coverage of that op-ed that was in the Washington Post. They warned of the potential for total breakdown of the chain of command. God, this is chilling, along partisan lines, and the risk of a shadow government led by a losing candidate who refuses to concede defeat. Remind you of anybody? Directly referencing former President Donald Trump. In short, we are chilled to our bones at the thought of a coup succeeding next time, they wrote. And they outlined 4 preventative steps they argue should be taken. I'll just read these quickly and then you can comment, Matt. First, the leaders of the Capitol riot should be held accountable. They called on the Department of Justice, the House of Representatives Select Committee investigating January 6th, and Congress to show more urgency. Second, the Pentagon should immediately order a soldier review on the Constitution and electoral integrity and on the laws of war and how to deal with an illegal order. No service member should say they didn't understand whom to take orders from during a worst-case scenario, they wrote. The Army's action should also involve finding and removing potential mutineers and stopping efforts to subvert the chain of command through propaganda, which is everywhere. Finally, the generals advised the Department of Defense to war game, as I mentioned earlier, a potential insurrection or attempted coup following the 2024 presidential election. My God, folks, that's where we're at, to identify weak spots and to deal with them. Matt?
People have heard me talk before. Well, no, I'm not a huge fan of President Obama's foreign or military policies, but one thing he did quite right was when he fired General McChrystal in 2010 for insubordination. And I think you have a very real issue here where for decades now, you have a lack of authority exercised by civilians over the military.